Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see you all here. Welcome to Friends of Alliance magazine here in the Aga Khan Foundation's beautiful headquarters in London, and also to those tuning in to the live stream around the world. Welcome to you all. I'm Charles Keating, the executive editor of Alliance. I wrote my first article for Alliance, I think back in 2006, when I was a rather more fresh-faced director of the Pears Foundation. And now I have the privilege of serving as editor of Alliance 15 years later. Alliance aims, as many of you know, to put our readers at the heart of global philanthropy. And today's event is part of Alliance's 25th anniversary series. We're offering 25 moments across the year exploring what the future of philanthropy holds. And we're delighted to have all of you with us today. We're also really pleased to be back at the Aga Khan Foundation. They hosted us for our event on feminist philanthropy on Election Day in December 2019. And I don't think we've done, or many of us have done many in-person events since, but it's really good to be here. And I'd just like to call upon Matt Reed from the Ashoka University Foundation, our host, to say a few words. Welcome, Matt. Please come up to the lectern.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome to the Aga Khan Center. On behalf of the Aga Khan Foundation, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the building. I should say on behalf of the foundation because there are actually 3 Aga Khan institutions that reside here. There's us at the foundation, there's the Aga Khan University's Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilizations, and the Ismaili Institute, which are based in the building. And so most of the building is devoted to students, faculty and staff, and researchers associated with those 2 institutions. The thing that links all 3 of us, besides His Highness the Aga Khan, is a commitment across our network to improving the quality of life in all its dimensions, promoting pluralism, and enhancing civil society. And it's with that last bit in mind that we're very happy to have Alliance here with us today, and all of you here, because our association with Alliance goes way back. I was told that one of my colleagues wrote an editorial for the magazine in 2003, so slightly before your beginning with them. So indeed, it goes back almost 20 years. In the last several years, we've worked closely with Alliance thinking about community philanthropy. It's one of the things that we promote in the communities in the developing world where we work to help communities and community groups sort of take charge of their own development so that they can use philanthropy as a tool for their own empowerment. And I think that's something that's very important, a very important dimension of philanthropy in all of our cultures, but you see it as, I think, a tool for advancement wherever we work. So that's why we're happy to have you here today. I will leave the rest of the afternoon to you, and I hope that we have you back at the Aga Khan Center another time. Thanks very much.
And thank you for bringing up the theme of community philanthropy, a really important trend of the last 25 years we'll be talking more about. I'd also like to thank our sponsors of today's event. That's Badr Jaffer, who's an Emirati-based philanthropist, the founding patron of the Centre for Strategic Philanthropy at the University of Cambridge, and also host of a fantastic series of podcasts, The Business of Philanthropy, where Badr talks to leaders in the philanthropic sector around the world. And you can see them on alliancemagazine.org and on the Cambridge University's site. And I'd also like to welcome Western Union and thank them for their support and their engagement with us. And I'm going to call upon Austin Skeets from Western Union just to say a few words. Welcome, Austin.
Thank you. You pronounced my surname right as well. Not many people get that one right. Well done. Thanks, everyone. Great to meet you all. And if anything, great to see you all in the same building. I think the last 2 years has seen a collective lexicon change to include Zoom, you're on mute, breakout rooms, Teams, Skype. And yet, here we all are, BAU, and I love the fact that in both welcoming speeches no one mentioned the shit show that was the last 2 years. It was BAU, philanthropy as norm, business as norm, which I think is something that my colleagues at Western Union and I in particular are really touched by. So Western Union as a whole work alongside the NGO space to facilitate banking requirements. So we noticed as of the Clinton Foundation's 2014 kickoff event that as an industry, versus for-profit businesses, they're completely unbanked. So set about to change that, and since then have onboarded, I think, 1,600 different NGOs, including that of some of the sort of household names, which is a fact we're incredibly proud of. That said, you know, it requires this sort of open, honest communication at events like this to address issues and share best practice, which is something that, in particular, we find incredibly inspiring throughout the NGO space. So once again, just wanted to thank you all for coming today. It's great to meet you all here in person and see some faces face to face. Looking forward to touching base with you all directly. We've got Jack on table 4 and Judd on table 5. If you need anything, please just give us a shout, wave a hand. We're happy to have a chat. Thanks again. Take care.
Thank you, Austin, and thanks for mentioning best practice. We'll be talking a lot about best philanthropy practice in the course of today's discussion. One person who sadly couldn't be with us today because COVID restrictions make it harder for her to travel is the chair of Alliance Publishing Trust, Liz McKeon. But we have a recorded message from Liz, which we're just going to play now before we move to the main events.
My point exactly.
Greetings from Amsterdam. My name is Liz McKeon, and I am honored to serve as chair of the Alliance Publishing Trust. I do apologize, though, that after 18 months in lockdown, you come out to celebrate and you're asked to watch a video, so I promise to keep this short. Today is an important milestone, and it's only fitting to mark it with gratitude. I want to recognize my fellow APT board members and thank them for their service as stewards, allies, and provocateurs. The work of the APT board is made easier by the Alliance editorial board, its steady hand and its wisdom, more than 24 individuals who donate their time and expertise to advise on content. To the many contributors past and present, thank you for your thoughtful and compelling pieces. And that leaves me to recognize the beating heart of this magazine, its staff. David and Charles, thank you for your tireless effort, your great leadership, and your compassion. Alongside Elika, Zibran, Anne-Marie, Andrew, and Alan, you have made Alliance what it is today. Having reached its 100th issue, Alliance, much like philanthropy itself, is coming to grips with the fast pace and dynamic change in our world. I encourage you to read this issue from cover to cover. Give comments, make your voice heard, and push yourself and each other to reflect on the state of our sector. Where are we falling short, and how can we uphold our promise now and in the future, all over the globe? Before I close, I have to say that in my day job in philanthropy, I am used to being pitched, so let me shamelessly turn the tables and pitch you. Alliance has achieved 25 years as a non-profit. The best way you can support it now and in the future is to subscribe, become part of the Alliance community. And if you appreciate what we do, please also consider donating to Alliance via the donation page at alliancemagazine.org. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the celebration. Congratulations, Alliance.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to all of the board of the Alliance Publishing Trust who provide support and oversight for our charitable purposes. And Liz, you might recognise for her leadership as a climate champion working at the IKEA Foundation, so I'm sure you'll hear more of her on that front as well. So we're now going to move to the panel discussion, which is going to be the first part of today's event. Before we do, just brief health and safety comments around our COVID protocols. They've been sent to you in emails already, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask a member of the Alliance staff. Also bear in mind that the entry is over there and the exit over here, so please try to observe that as you're moving about the room. We also have Chris Shipton from Live Illustration over here, who will be capturing proceedings, and his illustrations will feature in our coverage next week. But so too our 100th issue. It's a real milestone issue for us, filled with reflections on the past and future of the field and Alliance's own future direction. There's some substantive critique of the editorial direction we take. So to comment on all of that and to discuss the issues, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel who I'm going to join now here. And that includes Danielle Walker-Palmer to my right, the director of the Friends Provenant Foundation and a former guest editor of Alliance's Investments issue, and Safina Ahmed here from the John Ellerman Foundation, who's been a very powerful reforming voice in the sector in recent years. But we're also delighted to be joined by members of the editorial team for this 100th issue. And that includes Ingrid Srinath, who's the director of the Centre for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University in India, as well as Masha Chertok, director of CAF Russia. Ingrid and Masha have been very long-standing friends and colleagues of Alliance and worked hard alongside the professional team. And I'd like to thank them in advance of the comments that they will make, which will be their own comments. So we're going to proceed with the panel, talking about 5 different areas in the next 55 or so minutes. First, we'll have a quick comments on some trends of the last 25 years. We'll then have a brief discussion around elite philanthropy, some of the problems, tensions, and some would say contradictions around that we've covered over the years. We'll have some questions to the panel on climate change and about diversifying and broadening the field, and then some comments about the future of Alliance itself. So we'll do our best to get through that in the next hour. But if I can start with Danielle, and welcome again, Danielle. How well do you think philanthropy is evolving to meet what are some of the very immense challenges of our time?
I think philanthropy, like many things, it's a bit of a curate's egg. It's kind of a bit, and then not enough, and then too fast. I think occasionally we shift. We tend, in philanthropic terms, to be a little bit faddy. So occasionally we'll all run in one particular direction, and that is not particularly helpful on occasion for the sector. But then in other ways, in terms of our governance, in terms of the way our boards are comprised, the way, in some ways, we can stick with long-term issues. We hold fast and don't move when perhaps we, on occasion, should. So I would say we are evolving, but it is sometimes too fast and sometimes too slow.
And what, maybe just name one of those issues where you think we should move faster, but we're not? What do you have in mind?
Well, I would say particularly this is a UK context, but I would say in terms of the way we approach governance and diversity and the boards that we have, the last survey by the Association of Charitable Foundations found in the UK that we had a 99% white trustee boards, certainly 2/3 male, and quite a lot of that, I think certainly over 75%, if I'm right, were recruited by word of mouth. And that needs to shift. That is not industry standard really anywhere. And we as a sector need to respond to and be responsible in that regard.
Well, thank you. We'll come back to talk a bit more about those questions in a bit, including whether there has been some change for the better, at least in the UK. But if I can turn to Masha Chertok in Russia, community philanthropy was mentioned just in the introduction. And we've seen in the Alliance anniversary poll, which you'll see in the 100th issue in front of you for those that are here, that community philanthropy was highlighted as one of the most promising developments of our sector over the last 25 years. Masha, what has been the impact of community philanthropy where you are in Russia?
Well, you're right, Charles, that Russia has become one of the testing grounds for community philanthropy in the last, well, over 20 years now, because the first community foundation was set up in 1998. And there are many more since then that started. Some of them didn't survive, but mostly I think community philanthropy is something that is really that really responds to the kind of Russian problems when people feel, disenfranchised from making decisions about their own life, when resources are scarce and very centralized. And don't reach provinces and small towns and even rural, let alone rural areas. And community philanthropy is the response to this all and many other problems because it's a mechanism that allows people to actually feel that they matter, that they can decide about their life, about their community, about the environment they want to live in. And it also allows collective action, because one of the kind of Russian features is that people are very individualistic. It's kind of a post-Soviet legacy, I guess. So community philanthropy is actually one of those models that, although it doesn't look like, you know, where it started in America, it looks very different here. And it's not so much about money, but it's more about people and about connection of these people and them being able to build, you know, a space where they can trust each other, where they can act together. And actually, I think the fact that Giving Tuesday came second in your poll as a movement, you asked you asked the readers about philanthropic movements. So Giving Tuesday is an ideal combination with community philanthropy, because it is about people, and it is about an individual feeling connected, feeling responsible, feeling generous, and empowered to actually do something about their life. So yes, I think that's one of the highlights of the past 25 years, definitely, Russia, and it's been an inspiration for many.
Thank you, Masha. And just moving from Russia to India, if we can. Ingrid, the same Alliance poll predicts some explosive growth of philanthropy in Asia. And to what extent are you seeing signs of that where you are? And also, if you want to comment also on the trends around Giving Tuesday and online giving, please feel free to do so as well. Welcome, Ingrid.
Thank you, Charles. I'm so delighted to be with you today, even if only in this virtual, disembodied way. So all kinds of philanthropy are certainly booming in India, in China, and in many other parts of Asia. This is, of course, just a logical consequence of growing wealth and, of course, growing inequality. The data, sadly, are neither comprehensive nor particularly reliable across Asia. But in India, for example, we are estimating that private domestic philanthropy has almost doubled in the last 2 years. So it grew by about 91% just over the 2 years preceding the pandemic. And it's then surged even more since COVID-19 struck. The two areas that are growing most rapidly are giving by wealthy individuals and online giving, as you mentioned. But it's not just the volume of philanthropy that we're seeing growing, we're also seeing some trends towards more diversification. I've often joked that education is to philanthropy in India what cricket is to sport. And fortunately, we're now starting to see philanthropists move beyond sort of the tried and tested thematic focus areas. But this is across Asia, I should say, accompanied by growing constraints on international funding and shrinking government spending on the social sector broadly, but also government spending through nonprofits. The other thing that's growing rapidly, but on a much smaller base, is impact investing. So we're seeing not just sort of investments in social enterprises, but pay-for-performance models in particular seem to have caught the fancy of philanthropy in India. So, we've got more development impact bonds, I think, in India right now than anywhere else in the world. In line with that sort of more impact investing trend, the government is also talking about setting up a new social stock exchange that will, they hope, increase the pool of capital for both for-profit social enterprise as well as for nonprofits. But online giving, as you said, is booming. I mean, in part thanks to COVID, various platforms are reporting growth rates of between 200 and 500%. Cash transfers, for example, have suddenly gained traction after years and years of nonprofits trying to popularize that particular instrument. But I think across Asia, what we're also dealing with is the fact that philanthropy is just seen as an unmitigated, unalloyed good. And so there's very little critique or analysis even or feedback to philanthropy. So there's no questions yet around, how this wealth is being generated or the inequality that's fueling philanthropy, very little scrutiny or criticism of any kind. And last but certainly not least, the lack of philanthropic role in protecting democratic rights and freedoms and the space for civil society is a cause for concern across Asia as we see the space shrink quite rapidly.
Thank you, Ingrid. And you can hear from her answer just how difficult it is to generalise about philanthropy. It will look very different depending on where you are. Just to talk about another trend we're seeing in philanthropy, and we are.
And so, is my microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think there is absolutely a need for an ecosystem of different vehicles and models. If these are the ways in which more people can be encouraged into philanthropy, then that's an absolute positive for us, especially given the issues that we're facing. I think we have to be quite cognizant of the fact that they bring their own pros and cons, and there is no one best way, and we shouldn't seek that within philanthropy. Actually, I think what we should be seeking is healthy, robust challenge of each other, and use that as a way to keep refining the models that we have and the models that we don't yet know about. And inevitably endowed foundations do receive a lot of criticism, particularly around origins of wealth, how our wealth is invested, how quickly or not quickly enough we distribute our money. There is some transparency that we're still able to adhere to as part of that, and I think that's really important. And I think we do need to be engaging in constructive challenge to make sure that with other models like donor advised funds, that transparency is being baked into that way of working. And also, let's be embracing of them as part of the philanthropic ecosystem, because certainly in the trust and foundation sector and in the UK, we're very fortunate to be quite well networked if we want to be. If you don't want to be, you don't have to be. But if you want to be, you've got that opportunity. You can learn from each other. You can be in community in a way that means that we're driving ourselves forward. And I think we have to be open to the fact that other models exist. We need to bring them into those conversations and networks that we're a part of in order to keep driving philanthropy forward. But as I say, certainly not an expert, but I think at this point we probably need as many models as we can manage.
Danielle, do you want to comment briefly?
I'm just really interested in the question. It's a fascinating one, because I was thinking when Srinath was talking that, in fact, what we need to do to embrace some of these new models is to actually redefine what philanthropy is, away from the way we used to think of it. If you think of a Victorian model, it's very much, giving and endowing in that kind of direction. And it is actually shifting it away to much more about the use of capital or money for social mission. And it's about, that's one thing we've got, however we come about it, is that we do have money that is meant to be applied for a particular reason, charitable, however it's framed. And if we start to have that broader understanding of what it is, first of all, gives us, as perhaps more traditional foundations, more license to use all kinds of capital in all kinds of ways, but also it allows us to embrace and expand our networks to include things that don't look like us, because we're all trying in some ways to address social issues. And if we can start to do that, we actually can work a bit more collaboratively, more effectively.
Thank you. And Masha, when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that there's been a degree of disappointment that there haven't been a bit greater growth of foundations in Russia. It hasn't been the model that maybe was anticipated would take off. Would you, and then Ingrid, just like to comment on how on the growth of foundations or otherwise where you are?
Charles, are you asking me or Ingrid? Sorry.
You first.
Yeah, indeed. I do appreciate the consideration that there is a continuum of different ways of using capital for good, and foundations is just the one way of doing it. But still, given that, well, where we were like 20 years ago when the accumulation of wealth, of private wealth, was starting, and it really, Russia has an incredible private wealth, and inequality in this regard is striking. But I think we're generally very disappointed with what happened with foundations, because not much happened with them actually. There is just a handful of foundations that are worth mentioning, and the rest of the funding, which could be considered philanthropic funding, comes from companies, or it comes from the government, and this is a completely different level of kind of strings attached and motivations behind this funding, different from what foundations are supposed to be, more kind of risk capital, independent, and well, we know all of those characteristics, right? So I think the foundation's model for some reason, didn't play out, and it's not just Russia; it's in many countries which have a similar kind of risk trajectory of private philanthropy development. I'm sure Ingrid would, join me from India's standpoint. The same goes for many other countries, and it's not that other philanthropic expressions are flourishing either. So I think we are seriously overestimated the development of kind of big private philanthropy, and probably underestimated the development of people's philanthropy, which is a really good thing. But it's a slightly different conversation, which I hope we will have later.
Ingrid, could you comment just briefly on that, please?
So the big difference, I think, in India is this law that we have that requires businesses to contribute 2% of their net profits to social issues. And because India overall, like I suspect Russia and other emerging economies, is a relatively low trust kind of society, many of these businesses have then chosen to set up operating foundations rather than grant-making foundations. So almost 50% of that CSR, mandatory CSR money is actually being routed through companies' own operating foundations. So while we've had a huge growth in the number of foundations, they're not necessarily the sort of model that you're familiar with in the West. There's also, because of the regulatory minefield that the nonprofit sector has to navigate, there are a lot of people that just don't choose to register any kind of entity at all. And so you've got fairly large sums of money going out as sort of ad hoc charitable contributions by individuals. You've got things that function as foundations but are registered as private limited companies. It's a bit of a mess in terms of the legal frameworks under which philanthropy is operating. That's probably the significant differences in India.
Thank you, Ingrid. And maybe that just underscores, maybe not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that there's a lot of value to the foundation form that we do have, and a lot to protect with its ability to think, to think in the long term and act more transparently than some of the new forms. So, it might be that there's more than one way of concluding on this particular topic. But I want to just move the conversation, if I may, just two questions around elite philanthropy. When we were putting together a 100th issue, we wanted to identify one big overriding theme, or a couple of big overriding themes. One was climate change, which we've just covered in our June issue, but the other was about wealth inequality and the extent to which wealth inequality has grown. There are now 5 times more billionaires today than there were 25 years ago when Alliance was born. which puts philanthropy, and particularly elite philanthropy, in an interesting position of both being a solution to today's problems, because there's more wealth that can be used for philanthropic purposes, but also, to some, a symptom of today's problems. And in the issue, we've got a mini-series of 6 articles looking at this question of philanthropy and its relationship with the growth in wealth inequality. And back in 2011, we published an issue, my predecessor, about living with the Gates Foundation. It was a big moment when Gates Foundation's presence and power kind of symbolised this power and influence that elite philanthropy could have. It was a subject that we returned to, asking if philanthropy has too much influence or not enough influence, in one of the first issues that I edited back in 2016. But during this time, we have seen wealth inequality grow, and with it, criticism of elite philanthropy and the influence it has. And just want to really put to our panellists, whether that criticism is in your mind growing, whether it's fair, what can be done to counter it, to speak arguably in defence of philanthropy. A new book by Beth Breeze, who's in the room here, has done. But how can we have a more nuanced conversation whilst also challenging what does seem to be these greater extremes of inequality? So if I can turn first to Danielle, and then to Safina, and then to our colleagues overseas. What are your thoughts on how this how this situation can be addressed?
Well, I think actually Masha and Ingrid spoke, incredibly powerfully about, the relationship, or illustrating the relationship between philanthropy and inequality. I suppose from the perspective, well, that's just patently not the case. And I think if we see ourselves as part of those systems, we can actually play a much more creative part in the process.
What would that look like to you?
For us, I think one of them is that giving is not enough. And it's how you give, and if we see the problem as the lack of social mobility, it's not enough to give a grant to help a child go to school, but actually look at our operations, the degree to which we're assisting or addressing social mobility in our work as we do it. So I think it's just recognizing those things will help us square the circle, because I think there is perhaps an unhealthy relationship between inequality, extreme wealth, and philanthropy. And the only way we can break that down is actually by subverting ourselves.
Well, and there is a movement to shift the power, which means different things to different people, but it's featured in this issue as well. And Safina, what does these questions of power look like to you from where you sit in this privileged position as the director of a foundation, but also very conscious of your responsibilities and wanting to, if you like, democratise the work that philanthropy does?
And I think that last bit you said is the point, isn't it? Recognising that you are in a position of privilege alongside your power, and recognising that we aren't necessarily democratically appointed, and so we need to be very cognizant of that in the way in which we operate. And I do think that the kind of criticisms of philanthropy, and certainly elite philanthropy, are important ones for us to grapple with, but in doing so we must remember that elite philanthropy is not philanthropy full stop. And we are such a kind of diverse network and ecosystem of philanthropic organisations and individuals and so on and so forth. And if we allow ourselves to move to just one single stereotype or view of who we are, then we're going to lose all of the nuance and interesting kind of aspects of who we are in the meantime. And so obviously we have power, we are quite shielded, and yes, people can criticise us, but it doesn't really impact us. But building a little on Danielle's points, clearly we're part of the problem and part of the solution. And so unless we kind of accept some of these really difficult aspects of our existence, I don't really see how we can move forward. But when I say accept, that doesn't mean that we can't challenge the fact that perhaps elite philanthropy is not representative of all of us, or perhaps there are examples and moments of organisations responding and acting in ways that show that we can be better and we want to be better. So it's not to kind of constantly self-flagellate and do ourselves down, but I think it is about accepting where we need to be be doing a lot more and pushing all of us together, pushing towards doing that. But, you know, power brings a lot of privilege, but it also means we have to be more responsible, more accountable, and we have to accept that we have a role to play in dismantling some of these stereotypes.
Thank you. Well, one suggestion that is made, just before we turn to Masha and Ingrid, is in order to help philanthropy rebuild some of its trust, social contract, and social license to operate, is for foundations to be required, and indeed donor-advised funds to be required to spend a certain proportion of their assets each year. Yeah. That only happens in a small number of countries, in the US, in Australia, in Canada, 5%, 3% and 4%, I think, respectively, but not in the UK. What are your views on whether you think foundations should be required to spend a certain proportion of their assets as a way of maybe cementing its relationship with the society it's there to serve? Danielle?
Ticking that one. My feeling is spending is a bit of a... it's not the point. I really don't think the spend is the point. I think it's the use. I think we should be accountable for the use of all of our money. So, you know, I find it difficult, and it does happen. And I think the issue of Alliance that I guess edited showed it, that some philanthropists who are climate philanthropists also are invested in fossil fuels. I think that should be a conversation that is a public conversation. I think we should be accountable, and we should be transparent enough to have that conversation. But I would think, to me, just the spending bit, you know, you could be spending completely ineffectively and not addressing your issues. So that doesn't feel like the point of the issue. So I wouldn't wouldn't be in favour of that.
So not necessarily making more spending a part of...
accountability, yes.
Safina, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's all very fair points. I think it's about kind of trying to understand... We obsess about the spending bit, and it's a really important thing to obsess about. We need, you know, we're grant makers or we're donors, however we might characterise ourselves. So we need to think about how we're giving carefully. And I think that organisations that aren't should be supported to have conversations with whoever the regulator is to find out more about what might be driving that. And I think the Scottish charity regulator is trialling something where they're going to reach out to trusts and foundations that haven't spend X percentage will necessarily result in people doing that. You know, and then you've got compliance issues and all of these kinds of things, and whether that's just more resource for what it's worth. But I do think, you know, if we see that foundations aren't spending, are there checks and measures and ways of supporting them to do so, but remembering that that is not our only purpose or goal.
Thank you. And if I can just turn briefly then to Ingrid and then Masha, just for their comments on this broader debate about elite philanthropy. Ingrid first.
So I think first of all, you know, the somewhat simplistic bipolar classification of philanthropy bad, taxation good, that kind of thing, I'm not sure is particularly helpful. I think there's room for a lot more nuance. That said, I think some of the criticism, for example, the criticism of big philanthropy as being almost anti-democratic. I can't remember who it was that used the analogy of gods hurling thunderbolts at each other when they were describing the philanthropic support for opposite points of view in policy, for example, leaving out, you know, citizens and affected people and reducing it to that sort of contest. I think the questions around reputation laundering, around the conflicts between people's philanthropic activities and their business activities are all valid and need to be done more. In India, as I said, we're still, and most of Asia, we're still seeing philanthropy is still insulated from that sort of critique. In India, for example, last year we saw the first ever report that looked at the perils of big philanthropy. One Indian philanthropist has advocated for higher taxes for billionaires, and just this week there was one article critiquing Indian philanthropy during the pandemic. So it's very, very early days in India, and I suspect we will take a more Asian to use a stereotype, closed door, softly kind of approach rather than big confrontation on this. But really the issue of norms and ideally self-governance, self-regulation kind of norms around transparency, for example, transparency of both your grant making as well as your investments, transparency around your governance, better representation within your governance structures for the communities that you purport to support, better representation among staff. This whole vaccine debate, for example, an Indian philanthropist has been framing it quite well, which is how do we move from distributing solutions to distributing the capacity to solve? So questions like that, basically the whole series of normative questions around philanthropy, I think are overdue in Asia. And we could certainly do with help from publications like Alliance to sort of nudge the debate in the directions it needs to go.
Thank you, Ingrid. Masha, can you just make a very brief comment, and then we're going to just talk about another issue, climate change, another small issue for us to deal with. Masha.
Yeah, I think, as Ingrid said, we're not at the stage of big political problematization of big philanthropy, but I would rather look at this stage at kind of arts and crafts of doing good philanthropy, and basically look at how grant makers make their grants, because it's not just a matter of society doesn't trust philanthropists, it's philanthropists don't trust their own grantees, and kind of the level of bureaucracy and control and kind of prescription of what can be done and what way can be done with their money. I think that's going over right now, and this is the very high on my personal agenda, just start some kind of campaign against philanthropists exercising too much control and kind of working their grantees too hard to basically apply a report and kind of do the business of managing the grants. I think that's the basic stuff that needs to be improved very quickly.
So thank you, Masha. So very much around the toolkit of philanthropy. And in our workshops, for those of you here in London, one of the tables will be looking at what it means to be a modern grant maker. And I'm sure those questions about good funding practice will come up. Before we turn to climate issues, just want to ask anyone here in London who's at one of the tables, if you've just got any questions or any issues or comments you want to raise now. Just raise your hand and say your name. Can see Austin over there. Austin.
Yeah, so I was going to ask a quick one. You referenced about the fact that there's certain global issues that paradoxically, say, an NGO or an organisation will invest in, say, fossil fuels whilst seeking to combat climate change, and there is that sort of paradox there. Being that global capital, i.e. BP, for example, is the leading investor in renewable energy, how is it as a not-for-profit space can we best combat that potential paradox? What can we do as a sector to better manage that?
Thank you. Any other points or questions? Yep.
Just had one point. I guess in response to that, I think for charities as well, they have to walk the walk, and potentially some, can't name names obviously, but some charities will invest their kind of old dormant pension monies in schemes which, or companies which they would consider very at odds with their current strategies and ethics. And I think that there are a few, I think WWF have worked with Aviva to try and look at how they can diversify those kinds of giving, but I'd be really interested in knowing or seeing more about that.
Thank you. So 2 comments from the floor for those listening via the live stream, and one just about the paradox of investing in companies that are using fossil fuels, but also working to develop renewables, and also about how charities can be consistent the application of their values. And that really does, thank you for both of those contributions, that really does lead us straight into the conversations about climate change. Before I go to Danielle, who's really been pioneering work in this area, Friends Provenance Foundation, just want to mention an editorial from 2007. Caroline Hartnell, the former Alliance editor, her editorial in 2007 was asking, can we go a bit faster on climate? And that was, 14 years ago. Since then, Alliance has published, I think, 2 more issues on climate change and philanthropy, including our COP26 issue that's just come out in June. Is philanthropy failing on climate change? What do we need, does our sector need to be doing to really crack these issues? I know that's a big set of questions, but what would be the top things that you think need to be done? Danielle?
I'm going to sound slightly broken record-ish, but I do feel that we do need to be aware of where most of our money is. A lot of the endowed foundations, the money is sitting in investments of some description, and really understanding that and having a good understanding of that, as good as your grant understanding, feels to be a fundamental activity of philanthropy. And just to address some of those questions, I think, first of all, knowing where the money is, thinking also how how intentional it is. Do you want it where it is? So some foundations don't know they're invested in fossil fuels or know what they're invested in particularly. But then some do know, and they want it to be there because they feel it's doing a particular kind of job. And that feels very important as well. The next stage is actually thinking about using that foothold to push harder through capital markets for change. So that's engagement. And I think the Western Union would know about that. But it's actually talking to companies through your investment managers about the way they act, and to maybe push BP harder. If you're invested in BP, go harder, pushing their board to go faster on renewables. And I think if philanthropy actually started to realize what I called in my Alliance article, our superpower, in that we sit 1 foot in capital markets and 1 foot in social issues, if we can actually recognize that huge strength that we have, we can start to exercise and be a much more catalytic part of the solution. But I think quite often we get fixated on our marginal spend, and we talk about ourselves and define ourselves as a whatever funder, when that's just a small portion of our money. And I think if we could just really wake this sleeping giant that we are, we really would have a huge impact.
Thank you. Safina?
I mean, what else is there to say, I think, Danielle? No, but I think they're all really important points, and I think there is definitely much more that needs to be done in terms of raising our own kind of sectoral knowledge about how we invest, what we're invested in, why we invest in the first place, because I think there is probably a bit of a conversation to be had about whether or not that is the way in which we want to continue to grow our income. But that's, another debate for another day. And I think it's really important that we don't kind of do the easy thing of saying, well, we'll leave that to our finance and investment committee, or we'll leave it to our head of finance or whoever's responsible for these things, and make sure that these are things that we are all discussing and feel engaged with as a conversation, because it is our superpower, the fact that we have, this, if we took a total assets approach, and we've got the endowments, or we've got, money that's been invested in different things as a way of growing our own income. Just another point I would say is that, coming back to grant spend, there's lots of evidence to show that there is not enough being invested by grant makers or donors in climate related issues, and I think that has to change. That's a really easy and obvious thing that we need to do. There needs to be much greater investment, and I think as a sector, those that already are, like the foundation I work for, but others need to become much more explicit about supporting climate-related issues and climate as a social justice issue as well as an environmental one. And there's ways in which you can do that, be it through kind of the funded commitment on climate change, which the Association of Charitable Foundations manages in the UK, and other kind of similar pledges. But I think we do need to get much more explicit, robust and vocal about this as an issue, as an environmental and a social justice issue. And we need to get more kind of forward thinking about all of the other related issues like the biodiversity crisis. And, philanthropy shouldn't be on the back foot of these things. We are, we benefit from being able to think over vast time horizons. We're not going to get democratically ousted and so on and so forth. And so we should be thinking in these ways, in my view.
Thank you both. And so you clearly welcome the climate commitments that are coming from the foundation sectors in the UK, but also France, Spain, and now Italy. But are those commitments and those pledges from foundations enough in the absence of clear accountability mechanisms? So philanthropy funds governments to maintain their commitments and hold them accountable for their commitments through the climate action tracker. But there's nothing of the kind in philanthropy. So what are the good of the commitments, particularly when philanthropic spending on climate is less than 2%? What's good of the commitment without accountability mechanisms for philanthropy itself? So I just wonder what your views are on whether there should be some kind of mechanism to track, monitor and assess what philanthropy is doing in relation to climate. Whether that's even on the table for discussion where you are.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we fund something called Project Trace, and that looks at the way supply chains use certain things, and we're able to see really interesting data around supply chain issues and ecological and environmental issues relating to that. So clearly, I think we might fund those things. Philanthropy is it good at holding its mirror up to itself? We have Alliance, which helps us to do that and to kind of grapple with some of these key issues. What would work better, the carrot, the stick? I think there is a conversation, and I think in philanthropy we do go for the more kind of arm round the shoulder, softly bringing everyone along with us. But maybe we need to get kind of more robust with each other too. And I agree, maybe the commitment isn't sufficient, but it's definitely started a conversation that wasn't happening before the commitment. So it's clearly helped, but you're right, we've got to act with more speed. And should we hold a mirror up to ourselves? I don't think we should be afraid of doing that, no.
Thank you. And Ingrid, I would just turn to you for a comment from the context in India, where there's an India Climate Collaborative. You've got notable trusts like Tata that are invested in climate issues and been instrumental in that collaborative. But at the same time, lots of coal being produced there, I think. Ingrid, how does it look from where you are?
So the short answer is we do need to do much more. The two complicating factors in India. One is sort of the widely held belief across in business certainly and the government that we are playing catch up on development, and so we have some sort of right to pollute, that the onus or the bulk of the onus for climate change work should lie with the West. So there's that. The Indian government has made its hostility to climate change-related philanthropy from international organizations crystal clear. This goes back to the 2011-2012, where the previous government, started up, in fact, this whole bogey of foreign funding being anti-development, and then this new government is sort of continuing. Even this week, there have been new reports of international funders who've been targeted specifically for their action against the climate crisis. And so this has a predictably chilling effect on Indian philanthropy's willingness to engage on this topic. As you said, the India Climate Collaborative is the one sort of bright spot on that horizon. I would, of course, be remiss if I didn't mention also the WINGS the International Philanthropy Commitment on Climate Change. And I think that's something that perhaps collectively as a community we could all help advocate for.
Thank you. I'm sorry we're not going to be able to talk that much more right at this moment about climate, but I can assure you that Alliance's coverage of climate will continue. We'll be at the COP later this year, and our Climate Philanthropy 2030 initiative will continue to increase our own coverage of climate with weekly coverage over the next decade. One issue that has struck us, and it's inevitable given our anniversary lens, is about the diversifying of the ownership of the debate on philanthropy. And we've talked about diversity in a number of contexts, but one is around younger people and the voices of younger people. In our 100th issue, we have a set of perspectives from what we've called the Millennials, a group of philanthropy practitioners and professionals born in 1996, the same year as Alliance, who are offering their views, their hopes and dreams of the future. And we really want to ask the question about whether the voices of younger people working in philanthropy are being heard enough. And I'm delighted that one of those millennials is here with us, Joanna Pinkowska. If Joanna, you want to come up to the panel and just sit beside Safina. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for getting my surname right as well. It's quite a hard one.
Well, Joanna, as I say, is one of the 25-year-olds. There's 21 of them that have contributed their views around the world. We're lucky that we have Joanna here. She's a Senior Policy and Engagement Officer at the UK's Association of Charitable Foundations, but has also worked in Europe with Daphne, so has a Europe-wide perspective. Joanna, if I can just hand the floor to you to really ask about your sense of whether young people are listened to enough, and what you think, first of all, speaking for yourself, what you want to see more of.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm really grateful for you for inviting me here. It's great to be on a panel with Danielle and Safina, who I've seen online, and all of you here today too. And I'm also grateful for Alliance magazine for kind of setting an example by giving a platform to younger voices in this magazine. And if you haven't had a chance to flick through all 100 pages of the 100th issue, I think it's around page 80-something. There's some contributions from some younger people working in philanthropy from across the globe. And we were tasked to answer questions around what we hope to see in the next 25 years, what changes we want to see in the world, and then related to that, whether philanthropy can kind of rise to the challenge and make those changes happen, and what changes need to happen internally in philanthropy in order for that to take place, which was quite a daunting task, I have to say. Big questions. I focused on equity because I started making quite a long list, and I realised that on my long wish list for the year 2046, I suppose it would be, had equity kind of running through it in terms of looking at root causes of disparity, whether it be kind of climate impacts or gender or race disparities, or kind of both in outcomes and opportunities. But the theme running through, I think, all 15 contributions in the magazine is really urgent action on climate being needed, and that's something that you just discussed, so I don't want to repeat too much, but I would urge you all to read the contributions. There's a great one from, I think, Ni from Ghana, who I can't really quote directly, but he says something along the lines of climate justice being seen not as an environmental issue, but a social issue with a moral responsibility. And I think if that resonates with you, get in touch with me if you're a UK foundation and you want to join the Funded Commitment on Climate Change. But of course, looking at all these challenges, there was some positive, I think, optimism about the potential of philanthropy to meet these challenges and make these changes happen, which hopefully doesn't come as a surprise because it's practitioners working in philanthropy. And I think if we didn't believe in the potential of philanthropy to make these changes happen, we wouldn't be turning up to work every day. But of course, also alongside that, there was some healthy skepticism and criticism. I think along some of the issues that you've discussed today already, particularly around diversity. Someone mentions the kind of urgent radical change in terms of power dynamics that needs to take place internally in philanthropy before we can look outwardly at making external changes happen. And something that I thought was quite interesting that cropped up was around democratization of philanthropy and kind of inclusion. I think this touches on something that you both discussed earlier around kind of reframing philanthropy and redefining philanthropy. And I think that brings you back to your original question around youth voice inclusion, because I think it's not that young people aren't active in philanthropy. I think there's lots of research recently by Beacon Collaborative about millennial donors being really active around COVID. and of course giving in their time and resources all around the world. But it's whether institutional philanthropy is recognizing that and partnering with those young people and kind of, giving them a voice and recognizing the work that they're doing. So I think that's the young philanthropists is one way of addressing your question. But from my personal experience of working within institutional philanthropy, I work for ACF, which is an umbrella organisation, a membership organisation of foundations in the UK. And I think there's lots of ways that foundations can engage younger people through paid internships or youth advisory panels, or I think there's a contribution from McQuinn Murphy from America, and he kind of raises some of these points and recommendations, and kind of looking at your recruitment and not having, university degrees as a requirement, because that's a big barrier for a lot of young people. But I think beyond that, what I want to raise and kind of challenge people on is getting young people involved in decision making and governance. Danielle started by mentioning some research ACF did that looked at trustee boards being kind of 99% white and 2/3 male. That research also mentioned that only 3% of trustees at the time were under the age of 45, and the majority were like over 60 or 70, which is striking. And I hope that there's been a big young trustees movement in the UK, and I hope that the figure has grown beyond 3%. But I think it's a real shame, because I think any diversity, but particularly age diversity, any diversity, but including age diversity in governance can bring real resilience to the organisation. And I think young people bring new perspectives, bring kind of innovative solutions, just by virtue of not being within philanthropy for as long as many of you have. I think we can kind of think outside the box on certain issues. And not to say, of course, experience is very valuable, and I'm sure kind of the years of experience you have and the mistakes and successes that you have learnt in your previous work is really important to organisational success, but I do think it's valuable to look at including young voices. The last thing, if I do have any time, that I just want to say, sorry, a lot of thoughts on this. I think it's important to look at not just young people as a homogenous group. I think kind of looking at diversity within the generation is important. I think I can come here and speak to you all and maybe bring some new ideas as a younger person, but I am able-bodied and I'm white and I went to university, and I think it's thinking about what kind of perspectives and experiences do you want to bring into your organisation to make sure that you're not just kind of ticking a box about younger people. And I also think, last thing, I think in thinking about not kind of just bringing in a young person because you're kind of ticking a box, I think there's something that we need to think about in terms of inclusion in the organisation. I think from my experience working with foundation staff, there seems to be like a hierarchical divide that inevitably emerges between younger junior staff and kind of more senior executive level staff. And I think the junior staff often have quite a lot of ideas and practical solutions that I think need to be listened to. So I'd recommend kind of for dialogue and communication to be set within the organisation so that these young people can feed into decision-making level conversations.
Well, thank you, Joanna. There's lots. Pleasure both to have you here today and for your contribution to the issue alongside an extraordinary set of 25-year-olds working in the sector. I'd like to just invite some brief reaction to that, but it will have to be very brief because we're running out of time. But if I can go first to maybe up to Masha for your reaction, and then Ingrid, and then Safina and Danielle. Masha.
Yeah, it's a bit sad because I'm kind of been in this sector for about 25 years, so reflecting my own age, right? I think it's probably slightly different in Russia because the sector is young and there are many younger people employed in foundations and NGOs and starting their own foundations and NGOs, and there is also this phenomenon of kind of children of wealthy individuals being in charge of their foundations, and it actually makes a lot of sense. I would say probably more sense than if they were doing it themselves. But obviously, philanthropy would be much better in engaging with younger people, not just for their representation's sake, but also because philanthropy tends to speak a very kind of formal, old-fashioned language, which is not understood, and it becomes part of the problem of trust, of kind of understanding of what philanthropy and foundations are about, and we need to employ and use the sense of younger people able to speak a different language and be kind of on the same way with the audiences who want to reach out, who want to impress with our thoughts and impact. And the world has changed so much. I think we just need to be conscious of our own limitations in kind of interacting with this world, and people can really change this.
Thank you. And just final reflections from you, Ingrid?
So I think in India what we're seeing is, one of the more promising things we're seeing is actually the influx of young philanthropists, particularly out of the tech sector. And what they're bringing is this logic of disruption with them, and also a degree of agnosticism about form and grant making versus social investment. Their toolbox is sort of more diverse, and some of the best stuff that's happening is there at that intersection of young philanthropy and technology, for example. But also the scale of ambition that they're bringing. I mean, they're really not willing to settle for slow incremental change. They're quite clear that you have to sort of move fast and break things, and that's refreshing as well, with all the relevant caveats, of course. And I think young people, both young philanthropists as well as young people in philanthropy and just young citizens, are all claiming agency in a way that no previous generation has. So they're not willing to be passive philanthropists. They're not willing to just write a check and wait for a utilization report to come in 6 months later. They want to be actively engaged in shaping interventions and shaping programs. And so I think that's really where the great value add is of young people as philanthropists in philanthropy, and just in holding us old people's feet to the fire.
Thank you, Ingrid. And Daniel. And, sorry, it's Safina and then Daniel.
Well, very conscious of time, but super briefly. What else is there really to say? So thank you, Joanna. Thank you for sharing your thoughts so openly. And I think a final thought, if I may, is just that ultimately I think we equate experience with age, and I think there is a much more expansive approach or definition we could apply to experience, and so it is essential for us to have multiple perspectives, and I think that we shouldn't keep kind of lying to ourselves about experience meaning years of service.
That's great. It was really fantastic comments. What I was struck by when you were speaking was actually what you're saying is philanthropy needs to engage in a process of social change. And we've kind of managed to dodge that for kind of quite a long time in some cases. And I think that's the challenge. And I think as philanthropy, by engaging in a process ourselves of transforming ourselves, we'll have better empathy and be more effective in talking to other people about social change, because we know it's hard and we know what kinds of sacrifices and kinds of risks and things that people balance when they don't change. And I think if we recognize that's what we've got to do and engage in it, we will be better. We will come through it, better funders and more effective in achieving our missions.
Thank you, and look forward to seeing you, Joanna, in 2046. I'm introducing the next group of millennials, and one idea I'd like to put on the table is philanthropy supporting votes for 16-year-olds in the UK. For those in the UK, I think that might be an interesting cause that I haven't seen a philanthropic engagement with yet, but maybe one to come another day. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for the panel, and I just want to thank Ingrid, Masha, Danielle, Safina, and in particular Joanna for joining us here. We'll be going for a tea break in a moment, but before we do, just want to go to the lectern just to make one further and special final comment, and that is about our former long-standing editor, Caroline Hartnell. Just want to say something about her contribution to Alliance. Unfortunately, Caroline can't be with us today because she's shielding, but is watching on the live stream. And Caroline edited Alliance for I think 18 years, from 1997 to 2015, and really Alliance owes so much to her own contribution, personal contribution, commitment in so many ways. And I'd just like to invite Barry Knight, who's a long-standing colleague and friend and contributor to Alliance, just to say a few words in tribute to Caroline before I close in a moment.
Thanks, Charles. What you see today, which is this amazing kind of display of a mature organisation that's really beginning to contribute immensely to the development of a field in a very critical but respectful way, as the panel has shown, is partly due to Caroline. It's not wholly due, but when she left in 2015, she left behind a really stable, well-functioning organisation and magazine that is remarkable. And I know that because the year before I'd done a readers survey, and we managed to get a huge response to our questionnaire. So I was able to do some statistical analysis that really got at the heart of things. And what that readers survey showed was that there were two key dimensions of Alliance that really mattered. One was the excellence of the content, that people really said, this magazine is really top-notch in the way that it delivers its messages. The second thing, which I think in some ways was much more important, and I certainly didn't expect it, was that people said this Alliance is ours, which is actually wonderful, because if a magazine is ours, then it will survive, because lots of people will want it. And the question that Caroline had set me is, what would make Alliance an actually indispensable tool for actually the field? And I think the combination of those two things is what Caroline can leave behind as a legacy. The reader survey said some other things, that actually maybe the online stuff wasn't quite so good. But Caroline straight away began to fix that, and Charles and the team, David, Anne-Marie and others in the Alliance team have actually really moved along that line. So, that's the really critical piece. I actually just counted, I wrote my first article for Alliance in the year 2000, and it was about Kosovo. Do you remember that particular conflict? And I've been very active since, and been both a board member, a guest editor, and an editorial advisory committee member. And what Caroline also did, as well as writing and editing commissioning articles and editing the issue, was actually to develop the business. Because the original business plan was, which came from the Charities Aid Foundation, the magazine was given away free. So the more successful you became in terms of raising your readers, the more money you lost. So there was a huge challenge. And people like David Carrington over there and other board members really kind of moved along that. But Caroline was really behind that. So she was both actually doing the editor's job, but also doing the development stuff as well. So that was absolutely remarkable. And the other thing I want to say about her is her writing and editorial skills. Some of you will, who've written articles, will know how gentle she was, how supportive, how she would work with you through text, and occasionally you'd get a comment like, Barry, do you really want to say that? Which you knew, hey, you know, I got this badly wrong. But Christopher Harris, also a long-term former editorial committee member, described Carolyn as a samurai with pearls. Although she was very gentle and would lead with her pearls, occasionally there would be a samurai moment. And I remember getting into an argument with her about Oxford commas. Oxford commas are the comma that is around an and denotes a list. And she and I had this argument about that. And suddenly I saw my head rolling in the gutter. And she had, the sword had come out and my head had rolled. And Carolyn, if you're listening, you're still wrong.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And thank you to Caroline Hartnell, who was a mentor in my transition from Foundation Director to Philanthropy Editor almost 6 years ago. And it's wonderful to be partnering with her on the 100th issue. She was one of our editorial team. I'd also just like to thank David Drury, who's in the back corner, our Executive Director, who really makes Alliance what it is, one of our longest standing, or the longest standing member of the team. And he and I have written a little bit at the back of the issue about where Alliance is heading next, so please do have a look at that. Alongside that, you'll see some comment and critique about the future editorial direction of Alliance. Barry, I'm glad that you mentioned about our digital content. We've got a digital editor now in place, Elika Rui, over here, and Elika will be leading everyone through a workshop, which is where you will be doing a lot of the talking and the working now. So thanks for being so patient with that. All that is left for me to say is thank you for everyone that's joined us on the live feed. Please do bear in mind what Liz McKeon was saying at the start about supporting the philanthropy media by donating to Alliance, which you can do via our website, alliancemagazine.org. But for those of you here in London, we'll see you again at about 20 to 4 or quarter to 4. But we'll round you up promptly. But enjoy a well-earned break, and thank you to all of you.